I am really excited to hear your thoughts on the Disney Plus television adaptation of Gene Yang's classic graphic novel, American Born Chinese. Before we dive into this is the topic at hand right now. There are going to be spoilers in this episode. There are going to be
Yeah,
spoilers.
spoiler alert.
Agatha and I have not watched the full series yet. I have watched half of the series as of today, June 2nd. Agatha, you have watched.
I have watched 1/4 of the series.
Yeah. But the first episode is the longest episode.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, the episodes kind of peter down. It's really weird because Disney does this thing for their original series where they have inconsistent episode lengths. Like Mandalorian season 3 had that too. It was like one episode's like 50 minutes, and then another's like 30 minutes, and then one's 37 minutes, not counting credits, like counting the credits. And it's but American Born Chinese was like 45 minutes or 50 minutes for the first episode, and then the second episode was like 40, and then there was one episode it was only 30 minutes.
Really?
Yeah, they kind of vary in duration. But yes, regardless of the length of the episodes, we have not watched the entire series as of the recording, but I think we have watched enough, and we have both read the original graphic novel. Have you read it?
You haven't.
This is my second copy of it because I gave my first one away. I gave my first one away to Jason Lowe, who now works for Marvel, because he hadn't read it. And I was like, oh, take it, thinking I would never revisit this after loving it. And now I was like, fuck, I need to buy another copy. But yeah, and you've read this. I think we both.
Yeah, I read it. And I read it at exactly the right time, which was, I think, my last year of high school.
Okay, I read this in post-undergrad. So much later.
Oh, that's also very interesting.
So yeah, much later. And I think it would have affected me a lot differently if I had read it in high school. Because this came out. I think why don't we dive into it? Because I think that's the
graphic
crux.
novel first.
Yes.
And then we can go into the show as well and talk about like comparisons.
So again, for those who are listening or watching, spoiler heavy episode of Asians Represent. Watch the TV show, read the graphic novel first, and then come back. So graphic novel for me, I think, would have affected me a lot differently because by the time I had read this for the first time, I had really embraced my Chinese Canadian identity. But when I was in high school, I was very much like Gene in the comic. And I think the whole part about him kind of like turning white was something that I think would have hit me a lot differently in high school, because the high school that I went to in Toronto, so I was born and raised in Toronto. English is my first language. My father came here from China and my mother was born here. Both of them speak Chinese fluently. And grew up in a very white neighborhood, like a very white neighborhood. Like I did not know other Chinese people in my neighborhood. The only other Asians that I knew, maybe growing up, were the people who owned the candy store in my neighborhood. And that was it. The only other time I saw Chinese people were like with my family or if we went downtown. In high school, the high school I went to was like 90% Asian. And mostly Chinese. And the rest were like Portuguese, Italian, and then a handful of like other folks of different ethnicities. But I was like one of the only Asians there who didn't really speak Chinese well. I did things that none of my Chinese peers did. Like I was the captain of the swim team, and there were no Chinese people on the swim team. I wasn't good at like, I wasn't really good at math. I couldn't handle the Asian six pack. For context, for those who don't know, the Asian six pack is 3 maths, 3 sciences. I did my best to set myself apart from the 90% in high school. And it was like a point of pride to me, like being a banana, like yellow on the outside, white on the inside. It was like a point of pride for me. And I was like super resistant to learning Chinese, super resistant to like eating Chinese food. And like I'll eat it, but it wouldn't be my first pick. Like I'd always brought lunch to school, but I was always wanting to buy lunch from the cafeteria. And it was like not Asian food. It's like your cafeteria food. And I was always wanting to do that. And so if I had read this graphic novel in high school, I think it would have been like a huge slap in the face. Like, oh my God, that's me. But by the time I had read this, I had already kind of gone through university, already kind of had that like sort of adult awakening of like, oh my God, I've missed out on so much. And I was already past, I think, the end of this book, basically in my own character arc. I would have been in like American Born Chinese Volume 2. But the story of Volume 1 was my story. And so it was like looking backwards for me. Whereas I think if I had read it in school, it would have been like I'm looking in a mirror. I don't know. What about you?
This is very interesting. I think for me, I didn't grow up in Toronto. I spent some of my formative years in BC, British Columbia.
Lots of Asians there.
Yes, which had a lot of Asians. And well, I was in a town, I don't know, called Richmond. I think it's a city.
Yeah.
But I don't know how it works now. Like, because in Toronto, it's also kind of confusing. Anyway,
yeah.
It had a very, very big Hong Kong expat population. So, like, everyone that I grew up with that were also East Asian, not everyone, but like a high majority of them spoke Cantonese, which I didn't understand. But that was fine. I was not born here in Canada. I was born in Taiwan, but we moved away when I was in grade 4. So right. It's kind of interesting because my first 2 years were spent in the US, in New Jersey, where we were in a small town. That was like kind of like your environment growing up, where it was like I was the only one. There was like one other East Asian looking person, and they were Japanese in my grade.
Right.
So it was like when we first immigrated, I could not speak any English, but then within 2 years, I spoke like pretty much fluent English. It was also because I was young and like
you catch on the languages faster when you're younger.
Yeah, and then we moved to BC, and then I was suddenly like surrounded by a lot of East Asians again, and so I think I also had a lot of internalized racism because it's impossible not to. I think when your biggest desire is to fit in, like you have to internalize a lot of the kind of like not necessarily hatred, but the derision that is kind of levied at you. So I had that too, which I never really interrogated while I was in high school, but it was like I would feel like I was better than my classmates who did speak with an accent. And I was also like Jean in that I had enough of a circle of people that were East Asian, but that weren't like it was called like fresh off the boat.
Fobs.
Yeah, wasn't like fobs, I guess, was what we said. And that was like, that was a thing for me where I was like, I'm better, I'm different than that, because that is like the lowest on the totem pole back then. So like when I read the when I read the graphic novel, I keep confusing graphic novel and comic, but anyway,
Yeah.
I was like, whoa, that's me.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%.
And like, I was definitely called out, but in a way I was also like, I feel so seen, because like that's not really something that you really talk about, right? Even though I had other friends who were like me, who looked Asian, and also like could speak Mandarin at home. I was much better at it back then than I am now. But it was still, I still felt like I'm different. There's this distinction because I'm closer to like the West, or
Yeah.
like I'm closer to being like a Canadian. So then like reading it, I was like, wow, like this is a normal thing to feel this kind of like hatred towards my own culture.
Self-hatred, yeah.
Yeah. And then, but also it is bad.
Totally.
Like,
yeah.
yeah. And like the graphic novel was like, it's okay. Like, yes, it's normal to feel this, but also that's, this is not a good thing. And I was like, wow, like this is so eye-opening. But it's like, I felt seen. I felt like this is me, and it could be better.
Yeah, I could be better, right? I think that's like the similarity between our experiences is like, oh my God, we feel seen here. I feel called out. You're like, I feel seen. That's me. And I think that if you were to list essential reads that come out of like the Asians Represent podcast, like Orientalism, 100% up there. But I would put American Born Chinese on that list, because even if you're not Chinese, this is still something that you would get. Because this is a story of the diaspora.
Yeah, I think if you're diaspora and living in a place where what you look like is not the majority, you would definitely relate.
Yeah.
It's universal in that way.
Oh no, you go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying, like, when we were in Ottawa last weekend, when the funeral we were attending was in like a small town. There's like 9,000 people there, and I saw like no Asian people, and like I stood out. Like, and like it didn't help that I was like I fully dressed like a Uniqlo model. I had like Aerism on. Yeah. And
go off.
Yeah, I was like, I got the oversized Aerism tees, I got the shorts, and I had like a really obnoxious Jays hat on, and we were at a brewery, and an older white guy looked at me and then just gave me like the squinty eyes, like full on, and I was like, and like in that moment, I was like, I want to fucking fight this guy. Like, I'll fight an old man. Bad idea. But I'm also like with my partner's family. And I'm like, I want to tell them that this happened. But also, we were just at the cemetery, and I don't want to cause a scene. So I like sit there, and I don't even tell my partner, because I don't want her to like stress out. And so I'm like, I'm just going to stress out. And I just sit there, and I'm also like covered in mosquito bites because they like Chinese food apparently.
That's Ontario. Once it hits summer, is just festering.
It's the
with
worst.
bugs.
But like I'm sitting there in this brewery trying to like be like everything's okay while I'm trying to throw hints to my partner that like, hey, I want to go. But like I'm not telling her why. And she just thinks I'm getting impatient and I don't want to spend time with her family. And I'm like, I want to go. And for me, it was like, I just want to like blend in. And like, that's the story of American Born Chinese. And like, you don't even have to be American. Like, Canadian, we're Canadian, and it's the exact same story. And I full on had that sort of like, I wish I blended in more.
Yeah. That moment when you suddenly feel that you just don't belong here.
Oh, 100%. Like so we had the at the cemetery, like I didn't know what to do. I've never been to like a white person's like funeral before. And like, you know, like Chinese funerals are like really, there's lots of ritual involved and stuff like that. And I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what to wear. Turns out like dressing like an Abercrombie model. I wore like, anyways, I had an outfit change, but when we went to the cemetery, I definitely think that her family, who I'm meeting for the first time, this is her dad's side of the family. I've spent a lot of time with her mom's side of the family, but never met her dad's side of the family, and they all come from this small town. And I definitely don't think that they expected me to be Asian. I don't think that there was any judgment or anything, but there was like, oh, like the surprise sort of look. And I was like, oh my God, like this is so weird for me. Like the funeral wasn't even the weird part. It was like looking like this was the weird part for me. And I was like, that's American Born Chinese. And they've done that exact same thing in the first season of like Fresh Off the Boat. Did you ever watch that?
No, I didn't.
So
Yeah.
in Fresh Off the Boat, like the book is very different from the TV show. I'll like full on disclaimer there. The book is way darker. But in the TV show, in the first season, when Eddie Wong was still involved with the show, there is a scene when, and they do it very subtly in the ABC TV show, where Eddie opens up his lunch at school and he has noodles. And then you know what they're going to say. Oh, you're eating worms, right? And he goes home and he's like, I want to get white people lunch. And he wants to get like Lunchables, like that sort of thing. And we see sort of like, we get glimpses of trying to blend in so many forms of media. Like Fresh Off the Boat, really big one. But I don't think we've ever seen that idea of like self-hatred, trying to blend in and fighting against your parents and your culture put in the forefront of a story like American Born Chinese.
Yeah, that's true.
And I would say that I think we both agree that the graphic novel, in the way it's told, is much better as a movie.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the theme is much stronger in the
way
graphic
stronger
novel. And like the way that the story plays out is just, it completely is wrapped around the theme, which is brilliant. But also like that kind of like almost like parable like story, I think works better as a film.
I also really don't think that they couldn't do a shot for shot remake of the graphic novel in live action. I really don't know, because Ki Hui Kwan's character, his analog in the graphic novel, is full on wearing that traditional Chinese sort of like outfit. He's got the eyes, the buck teeth, and his accent is this really problematic accent. And he's this caricature. It's a caricature of that yellow face caricature. in the graphic novel. And I don't think they could have done that
No.
in live action to
No
the
way.
extreme extent. Because what they did in the live action show was instead they have Ke Huy Quan play this. He plays dual roles in the series. He is the actor and he is in this meta TV show within the TV show. And he plays essentially like Bobby Lee's character in Mad TV. Which itself was like interesting because he played many characters, but there was this whole thing about like he's your average Asian, but everybody thinks that he's good at math or good at violin, but he just can't, and that's like the joke. But I don't think that they could have done the sort of extreme examples of the sort of internalized racism and sort of external racism that you see in the graphic novel in live action.
Yeah,
And
I completely agree.
And I think the live action show is a lot more focused than the graphic novel. There is this clearer meta plot of like, oh, Wei Chen has to find the fourth scroll. And they talk about that in the graphic novel, but it's more of a driving force in the TV show, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would say that the TV show's plot is a lot more action focused. Like
100%.
It's not focused necessarily narratively, but it's
Yeah.
more like, it's more action oriented, I think.
Yeah, the action
Like,
drives the plot, not the sort of hard-hitting drama like in the comic.
yes. Yeah.
I think that's a good creative choice. And I'll say this, like, they have like an all-star team behind it. Like an all-star team. I think one of the biggest X factors is Kelvin Yu on it. And a lot of people don't even know who Kelvin Yu is, but he's behind like a lot of incredible work. So Kelvin Yu is like the guy he in the credits is like created for TV by Kelvin Yu, right? He's also, I think he's the executive producer as well. But Kelvin Yu is an incredible writer and producer. So you've seen him on screen in only a couple of things. The most notable thing he's been on screen for is actually Master of None. Have you seen Master of None? Okay, so Master of None was that Aziz Ansari show. Really good show. But Kelvin Yu played his like hot Asian best friend in Master of None. But Kelvin Yu has been working on Bob's Burgers since like it started. He's been working on Bob's Burgers since I'd always been working on it since like not since it started. He's been working on it since like 2020, I think. Because I know he joined Bob's Burgers later because his name appears in the credits, not in the earlier seasons. But he's written a whole bunch of episodes of Bob's Burgers, and he's credited as an executive producer on that show. And so he has a lot of experience with TV and telling these sort of really subtle, dramatic stories. Like Bob's Burgers has some seriously good storytelling. Oh, kitty cat. But Kelvin Yu is like, they've got an Asian producer behind the scenes working on this TV show with Disney. Whereas in like Mulan, they had like a white costume designer and I think they had a white director for Mulan or something like that. But in American Born Chinese, they have this like, it's created by a Chinese guy based on a comic by a Chinese guy. And both of them are like of the diaspora because like Jin Yang was born, he is an ABC. And Kelvin Yu is, I believe, an ABC. And they've got this incredible source material. They've got a great producer who picked it at the right time. Because if they had made this pre-pandemic, I don't think anybody would have watched it. I don't think so.
Why?
Because people don't... Pre-pandemic, I don't think people would have valued this type of storytelling. Like, I think when Fresh Off the Boat came out, which was pre-pandemic, it was like a big deal because it was an all-Asian cast. But they're not talking about the story. I think right now there are a lot more eyes on Asian storytellers because of Everything Everywhere All at Once. And in American Born Chinese, Michelle Yeoh is in American Born Chinese. She's incredible as Guan Yin, right?
Yeah.
Like, Ke Huy Quan, he plays a really good role. Like, so he plays the actor who is in this old sitcom called Beyond Repair, where he plays an Asian caricature. And it's almost like he's playing himself, right? But his roles of like Short Round and Data and the Goonies weren't really necessarily like harmful for Asians. They were actually groundbreaking. But he is playing his character is literally an actor who played the token Asian. He is the perfect choice for it. Also, him and Michelle Yeoh won Oscars, so there's a lot of attention on them. And then, of course, like James Hong plays the Jade Emperor, and Stephanie Hsu is like she plays like what was it the she's one of the demons associated with rocks. CG.
I don't think I watched that far.
No, you haven't gone that far yet. But they have this like incredible cast of people who have a ton of spotlight on them right now. And I think now is the perfect time for people to watch this at no risk, because there are so many people who have watched, like, who are thinking about like the diaspora. I know you said you need a break. How much time do you need, Agatha?
Like 5, I think.
Oh, I can just keep talking then. I'll just keep talking. I'll just keep talking. Yeah, I'll just keep talking. Yeah, like step away if you need to. I'll just keep talking.
Can I turn my camera off, or is that gonna mess things up for you?
I don't. You could always turn your camera off. We'll figure it out. It's all good. No worries. There we go. Now we just have a picture of Agatha. But yeah, like while Agatha kind of steps away for a minute, I think this is the perfect time for American-born Chinese to be out there, because just all this attention that we see on Chinese diaspora and Asian American storytelling. It's also a great time for it to come out because like streaming is so prevalent. Everybody has Disney Plus, or everybody has a friend who has Disney Plus who shares it with them, like I do. I share my Disney Plus with actually Emma on Asians Represent, and my family, and a whole bunch of other friends. Take that, Disney. But it's so accessible now. And I think that, you know, with the success of Everything Everywhere All at Once and Crazy Rich Asians and Shang-Chi, I think people want this kind of story. I also think that people are more understanding of the sort of issues that Asian Americans are facing right now due to the racism that has kind of been, I'm not going to say created by the pandemic, but the racism that people have felt empowered to be more vocal about because of the pandemic. And so to see characters being normal, to see characters who have very similar struggles to everyone else, I think is perfect right now. But yeah. And you're back. But yeah, I just really into the show. I think the casting is perfect. I think that the fact that they didn't go with like the old, like they didn't cast like the usual sort of actors in the leads, I think is really interesting. Like I think Ben Wang, who plays Jin Wang, the lead, is incredible. He's so good.
Yeah, he is so very good. Like, I was like, damn, okay.
I've never seen him in anything else.
Yeah, me neither. But I also don't really watch things usually. But like, he really captures. I mean, also the script is very good. But like, it really captures that like immense awkwardness, like self-consciousness, of like that age. I feel
100%. It's like, I think the main difference between the show and the comic is that it's less about him wanting to be white. Being white isn't his way, like literally, isn't his way of fitting in. He just doesn't want to be noticed. So he wants to participate in the things like he wants to be on the soccer team. He wants to not wear this weird hoodie that says hot stuff on the back. He like wants to wear like the Levi's denim jacket. He doesn't want to be noticed for his hobbies. Like he doesn't want to talk about like in comics.
Yeah, I feel like Yeah, that is a very smart choice. I mean, yeah, a lot of these choices are they first of all make a lot of sense for Disney Plus, the
Yes,
platform, because
safe.
like, yes, it is much safer. But at the same time, like, safe is not, it's not always like a bad thing. It's also just very smart, I think. Like making, because there is a generational gap, I think, in like how like North Americans and or Europeans, like just like people in the West, feel about like diversity compared to 10 no 20 years ago. It was around 20 years ago.
The graphic novel?
Yeah.
Graphic novel came out 14 years ago. Or no, 17
14?
year ago.
17.
17
Yeah,
years
so
ago.
compared to like 17 years ago, there's like a really big difference. So like I feel like also, I guess it depends on the town that you live in, but like that kind of like, I just want to disappear into whiteness specifically is like a little bit different from like the cultural milieu now. So I feel like that was very smart to kind of like,
Yeah. And I
switch
think
things
another
up.
thing is that when the original story was told, social media wasn't a big thing.
Yes.
Like when the graphic novel came out, like in 2006, I had just gotten a Facebook account.
Yes, same.
And that was back when you got a Facebook account, you could say like how you know somebody. And like
Oh, wow. Okay,
yeah,
I
it
got
was
after
like
you.
oh yeah, because of the original Facebook, it was like you had to get invited, and
Oh,
then
right.
you would have to say how you're connected to somebody, and then people would always do funny things.
Wow.
Yeah, like I remember getting my first Facebook account and being like, "What am I gonna do with this?" Like I don't know what I'm gonna do with this. But like I think playing off of social media now and like this faux
Yeah.
TikTok is
Yeah,
like super
that was
smart
very
because the sort of like stereotypical like fob character that's in it and the sort of like this like old sort of cartoon, right? The yellow face character or the I guess the character
Yeah.
that is alluded to the yellow face stereotype, or stereotypes of Asians in general, you see in the comic is basically like the memes of Ki Hui Kwan's character that go around social media, and
Yeah.
how that meme very subtly affects Gene in the show when
Yeah.
that sort of video of him goes viral.
Yeah.
It's the perfect modern interpretation of it because social
Yeah.
media has to play a role in it. It has
I
to play a
agree.
role in it.
I agree.
And people aren't going to be, I think it would have been too easy for them for people to just be overtly racist towards him.
Yes.
And I think a lot of the hardships that he has to face need to come from within.
And there's like, yeah, and the way that the racism is in the show is portrayed in the show versus like the graphic novel is like there's so much more like microaggressions, which makes so much sense.
So much more. And
Like
so much
very
more.
relevant, very relatable. I like halfway through watching the first episode, or was it the second? I don't remember. I was like, this show is too real. I have too many feels.
It's true. I mean, like, the whole thing of like, oh, I'm gonna pull you out of class because we have a new Asian student coming in, and you're gonna like be his buddy, but he speaks perfect English, right? And we were talking about that in our patron chat in the Discord server. It's like that sort of shit is like everyone can relate to that because it won't even happen to you if you're Asian. It's gonna happen to you if you're just the minority. It's like, oh, you're gonna be this person's buddy. Like, oh,
Yeah,
can you
Yeah.
like have you ever been at work when there's like a Chinese like patron or customer or whatever, and then they're like, hey Daniel, can you talk to them? How do you just assume I speak Chinese?
Yeah.
Like that still happens, and it's very subtle like you said, and I think that's the way to go with this than
Yeah.
have him constantly deal with like the easy stuff. I think him hating himself is such a like that being like his primary obstacle is so smart. I think the only unrealistic thing, aside from the supernatural stuff, the only unrealistic thing for me, the thing that I could not get, is his mom. His mom is far too nice and supportive. When I was watching it, so we binged the first 4 episodes. Sarah, my partner, everyone who is not Chinese, she is white, was like, "Oh, is that relatable?" And I was like, "Yeah, but like I feel like I had it way worse." Like I feel like I had it way worse than Jin, not only from like how I treated myself when I was in high school, but also like my family. Like
Yeah.
my dad wasn't around a lot because he worked a lot when we were younger, as like you see in the show. But my dad was like was really good at what he does, and he didn't have the struggles that I guess Jin's dad had. Jin's dad, first of all, played by Chin Han, great actor. If you've seen Contagion, he is in Contagion. He's in a whole bunch of other things too. But the mom was so different from my mom, because my mom was like your stereotypical like Asian diaspora tiger mom. I was like, I wouldn't have been able to do half of the things that Jin does.
Yeah. I mean, also like I keep getting like my sunscreen is like really irritating my eyes.
Oh,
Because I ran out of my old one. I got a new one. It feels really nice, except for my eyes are like dying now. But I kind of I agree in terms of like, I feel like she's nice in a way where she's like very like North American cool mom. You know what I mean?
Very much like follow your dreams.
Yeah, like, because I feel like I've definitely encountered like very loving and supportive. I mean, not like, again, like, not to say that like your parents weren't loving or supportive, or like my parents weren't, but like I feel like they're like supportive in a very specific way, even when they're like very accepting, which my parents actually were, especially my dad, were of me. But it's still like, it feels a little bit different from the way that this show portrays it. But I also understand, because again, it's on Disney Plus, and like,
Yeah.
I feel like
This has happened in both of the so the director, or at least one of the directors, Destin Daniel Cretton, he directed Shang-Chi. Unrealistic Asian moms in both Shang-Chi and American Boy. Because his mom really literally says, "I'm proud of you," to him as a kid. I'm like, I don't think my mom said she was proud of me until I was in my late 20s.
It's very interesting though, because like there is like a whole generation of like Chinese parents who are like very doting on their children, like because of like the one child policy, right? So I feel like it's not necessarily inaccurate.
I guess inaccurate to my experience.
Yeah. It's also not very accurate to my experience either. I can't imagine my mom like getting to that point where she would just tell me that she was
go for the
me.
sports. Go to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Like at that time.
I didn't have a good relationship with my parents at the time. My parents have a great relationship now. They fought a lot when I was younger. And like they just tried to fill my time so that I wouldn't get into trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like, oh no, go finish.
Oh no, you go ahead.
And I think it's specifically like being that expressive, like with how you feel about your child, that is not like disapproval. That was the part that was like, But their fights were so
very real.
It was really good.
Yeah, very real. And I mean, like, the fact that, I don't know, it's just like a really good modern story of the diaspora. I think the family dynamic, despite it being different from like the one that I grew up in, I think was really good. I think everyone can understand like having one of your parents not being at their full potential and having the other parent kind of push them. Or I think people can also understand, feeling lost and not having guidance, because I think that's the one thing in the TV adaptation that we see. It's like Jin feels lost about who he is, and his mom's just kind of like, be yourself. And he's like, I don't know who I am. and his dad's not there because his dad isn't even being himself. And I think that's what's so different, and that's what's a really subtle difference from the graphic novel. But I think that's something that more people can understand now. Certainly with like the political climate and everything. It's like, yeah, you could have like a super supportive mom and a dad who I wouldn't say doesn't care, but isn't pushing back as hard against what you're trying to do. But if you don't know who you are, and if you don't have, for lack of a better word, a guide to kind of discover who you are, then you're just going to feel lost indefinitely. And you might find a way out of that. But in American Born Chinese, the way out of feeling lost for Jin is to distance himself from his roots and try to be like everyone else. And by everyone else, I mean try to be a popular jock, and not to try to be white, but it's to be with the non-Asian crowd. And there are only a couple of Asian characters. Like he has a best friend who I think is South Asian, who he distanced himself from because he embarrassed him in front of all the white kids. There is, in later episodes, there is like a social justice club. They call themselves the Culture Club at the school, and their president is Japanese American. And she is like the opposite of Jean, where she's like, I am who I am, and I'm awesome. And she's like, this meme is harmful and perpetuates stereotypes, and people can't do this. And it's like really in your face. And Gina's like, I don't want to be associated with these people. And then there's, of course, Wei Chen, who is like, I will say, another incredible actor. Like,
yeah, I agree. He's
so
very good. Because the character does not have the same kind of depth and relatability in the earlier episodes, I don't know about later episodes, as Jean's character. But he's still, or the character, anyway, but like he's as Jean.
Yeah.
But I feel like he added a lot to it where
he does in the later episodes. He does in the later episodes. They do, I think it was episode 4, episode 3. They do this like flashback episode, but it's done in the style of like an 80s Chinese opera on TV. Like, you know, those ones that the old people are always watching? And it's like the Wukong backstory. And it's like, oh, like it's all about Wukong. And Wukong is like best friends with Numo Wang. And they're trying to go to all these parties. And you see all these cameos from Asian actors. Like, I didn't read, like James Hong as Jade Emperor, spot on. The one that I couldn't place was Ao Guang, who's played by fucking Jimmy O Yang. And he's just like this vain fish man. And it's so well done. But it's the backstory of Wukong in that he's this trickster, right? In the stories, he's this trickster. He always gets into trouble and he finds himself in favorable positions, either by his own doing or by fate, right? But this old Wukong contrasts the Wukong that you see at the beginning, where he's like, there is an uprising, there is a war, I need my staff, we need to fight. The Wukong you saw in episode 1 is basically a mirror of Jean's dad. But the Wukong you see in the flashback is Wei Chen. And there's this incredible growth across 4 episodes. And you realize that the dynamic between Wukong and Wei Chen is the same as Jean and his father. And Wei Chen is so well done because the way they made him stand out was not really because he's Chinese. The way he stands out is because they made him different from Jean. They made the two outsiders contrast each other in a way where the fact that they're Chinese isn't like the main reason why they stand out. Jean, oh, go ahead.
Well, I feel like the way that it's the clear contrast between like someone who has spent longer or like grew up in the West and like a fob.
Yeah, it's that, but also the confidence that they have. Like
Oh yeah,
everyone,
that's true. They
all
are
of the
foils to each other.
they are foils, right? Like all of the marginalized characters of the series all know what Jin is about. Jin doesn't know what he's about, but everyone else sees it. He wants to fit in so bad that he is willing to sacrifice who he really is, not talk about his hobbies. He's going to distance himself from friends who he thinks are weird. He's going to try to distance himself from the other like student in Wei Chen, right? But then Wei Chen, he's not different because of the food he eats. Like there's that one scene where he's like eating his lunch and he's taking everything out, but that's not really as big of a deal as like the graphic novel might have taken it, right?
Yeah.
The food, because there's that one food scene there,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
The crux of that scene is that, you know, he is himself.
Yeah,
He is
he's
confident.
not trying to blend
He's not
in.
trying to be someone else. He's like, yeah, I like this manga series. Here is this dope action figure. I've got the sticker. I've got a robot shirt. I'm just going to dress however I want to dress. And he's confident. And I think that's the thing that makes him stand out. He is confident and he is loud, but not in a way that plays to the fact that he's not loud or confident because he's Chinese. He's loud and confident because he has figured out who he is, and he's on that quest and everything like that. And that I think scares Jin because it
Yes.
draws attention to Jin's flaws.
Yes. Yeah.
Um,
I like
Yeah,
I like the way that character is developed a lot as well, because like I feel like it started with like we need a foil for Jin's character, or like whatever the consideration is, but then like I feel like a lot of Wei Chen's like behavior is justified because we know, we the audience know that he's not actually a student from China. He comes from like a position of power already, even though it's like not as powerful as his dad, but he already came from, so like a lot of his like confidence and or like even like in that cafeteria scene in episode 1 when he kind of just like shouts like, hey, why are you laughing, like that
or
kind
come
of
sit
like,
with me.
or no, when he was like why are you laughing to like,
Oh, yeah,
all the
afterwards.
students were laughing, like that's kind of like that kind of confrontational thing I feel like would feel very unrealistic if he didn't have that other layer of like his other identity. Like if he was just an international student, like I would be like, like I don't,
Yeah.
that's not relatable. But then I'm like, oh, but this is justified. So that layer, that additional layer of his like mythological origin then justifies a lot of the ways that he is a foil to Jin, that I thought was very cleverly done.
Yeah, I have very little to complain about when it comes to this show. I mean, I'm surprised that so few people have been talking about it online. I think that it's a very, very good way of understanding the sort of the challenges of being like a kid from two worlds. Because that's literally what they're doing, right? Wei Chen is a kid from two worlds. He's from like Chinese heaven, and now he's living in America. And Jin, while he is an ABC, American born Chinese, he is still a kid of two worlds as well. He is not quite American, and he's not quite Chinese, right? His Chinese is bad. He's, it makes him stand out. And if he went to China, like me, my first time going to China, you stand out. Like people know you're not from there. Like just the fact that I have tattoos, like I already stand out, right? The way I dress, how I speak, like I stand out. But here, just like last weekend, in my own country where I was born, I still stand out. So it's like, I'm not from here, and I'm not from China. And that's Jin's character. And that's also Wei Chen's character. But Wei Chen carries that confidence with him that Jin doesn't have. And I think the show is so good. And the casting is incredible. Like, I wouldn't change anything about the casting.
Yeah, the
Nothing
casting is
about
good.
it. Like Michelle Yeoh, and I saw in our chat, somebody else mentioned it too. Michelle Yeoh is incredible as Kuan Yin, absolutely incredible as Kuan Yin, and like Daniel Wu, also like a super underrated actor. If you folks have never heard of Daniel Wu before, but Daniel Wu playing Wukong, incredible. He's in another really groundbreaking show. I don't know if you've seen it, Agatha. It's called Into the Badlands. It's
I have not seen it, but you've talked about it before.
it's post-apocalyptic wuxia, and it's so good. But Daniel Wu's been in like a lot of like Chinese movies too. He did a really incredible movie with Jackie Chan called New Police Story. And New Police Story is it's like a reboot of Jackie Chan's Police Story series. But Daniel Wu played this like young guy who just gets into crime because of his father. Like it's really actually interesting how his character in New Police Story is basically what happens when you push your child away and your child tries to get your attention by turning to crime. Really good. He's super good in that movie. So is Jackie Chan. But he's incredible in that. I haven't, like 4 episodes in, and we haven't seen enough of Ke Huy Quan to know how he's going to, appear in the remaining half of the series. But I already know it's going to be good because they basically cast him as an actor who played an iconic and groundbreaking role as an Asian character in white franchises or white blockbusters. So I think it's going to be great. Also, like Ronnie Cheng was in it in this sort of like flashback episode, and he was also really good. Absolutely love the series. Do not wish they did anything different. I don't know about you. Do you think that there's anything that you would want them to do differently?
I guess there is always that one thing where when they're speaking Mandarin, because I do understand Mandarin, that I'm always like nervous when it's an English speaking show, of like how it'll sound, and it's generally pretty okay. And I guess
the Chinese character speaking Mandarin.
Yeah. It's like impossible. I mean, also like some of them are Cantonese.
Yeah.
So like that's harder. It is one thing that always takes me out of like being immersed because I'm always like, yeah.
Yeah. See, I wouldn't notice that.
I know. So it's not a big deal. Like it's not very egregious. Honestly, of all the shows, this is very, very good. But it is just a thing that always happens. I wouldn't change anything else. I think it was also interesting that the bullying wasn't too bad in the first episode and a half. And I appreciated that as well. And I don't think I would change that either. I don't know why I brought that up when we were talking about things that we would change. I don't think I would change anything else. Aside from if they all spoke like Mandarin.
Spoke better.
With one specific accent, I think.
So you know what's really funny? This is well documented. I don't know if this was intentional or not. But Daniel Wu, when he started acting, he couldn't actually speak Mandarin. He's actually like an ABC, and he can't read Chinese. So when he was doing like Chinese film productions, he had to basically be told how to say things phonetically, which is really interesting. Obviously, it's improved since then. But yeah, I get that. But I knew that coming in because I knew who Daniel Wu was.
Right.
I don't know anything about the other actors. I think it was also a spark. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead. No,
you go ahead.
I was going to say, but also it's like, of all the ones that I have watched, it's very good. So like, it's actually it's not as big of an issue.
I think
I would say.
if they had made this 10 years ago, all the characters would have been speaking Cantonese. And I think
Oh,
now Mandarin, at least from my experience, I think if I were to make this, let's rephrase that. If I were to make this 10 years ago, I would have had everyone speaking Cantonese. Because growing up, I never heard a lot of people speaking Mandarin growing up
yeah, that's
because
true.
most of the Chinese diaspora to North America is actually like from the south. It's from Guangdong province, it's from Hong Kong, where everybody speaks Cantonese. It's why if you watch Warrior, another extremely groundbreaking show about the diaspora, all of the characters in Warrior speak Cantonese. They don't speak
Yeah.
Mandarin.
I mean, yeah, it makes sense that there's a lot of Cantonese speakers in like the English speaking world because a lot of them came from Hong Kong, like
Yeah.
specifically when it was.
But in 2023, though, I think there are a lot more Mandarin speaking people in North
Yes.
America now. So it makes
Yeah,
total
yeah.
sense. I think the only other thing I might have changed is maybe the director, because the director's not Chinese.
Yeah.
But
I mean, the director of the first and the last episodes. The other ones are
yes, absolutely.
at least East Asian.
And that's just nitpicking. But I think he has experience working with Disney, and he did Shang-Chi. So I think that he was certainly qualified. That's just me nitpicking.
Yeah. I also feel like, yeah, we're just nitpicking. Like,
Yeah,
it's
we're just
actually
nitpicking at this
very
point.
good.
It's a phenomenal show, and I know that like we had a question from Kat, one of our patron questions, who was is actually a really good question to kind of end with. Because
Okay.
I think we're just going to keep talking about how relatable American-born Chinese is, and then we're going to get into really sad stories about our younger days. But Kat asked a question, and it was, do you feel that the American-born Chinese adaptation on Disney Plus portrays something new or different about the Chinese diaspora experience in North America? And does every piece of media created that centers diaspora stories have to be new or advance the narrative in some way?
Yeah, that's a great question for you since I didn't watch Fresh Off the Boat.
Yeah, so there's like a lot of stuff about the diaspora out there. Obviously, there's like Fresh Off the Boat. It's American-born Chinese. There's a movie. It was very I wouldn't say controversial, but like it's a darker one. I'd be surprised if our audience saw it. Have you ever heard of Better Luck Tomorrow? Okay, so Better Luck Tomorrow was like, I think it's an indie film, but it came out like in 2001, 2002, 2003, early 2000s. Only reason why I know about it is because it has Jason Tobin, who is in Warrior, and Sung Kang, who is in Fast and Furious. He plays Han. But Better Luck Tomorrow is like a crime movie about these overachieving Asian kids who basically get into crime. And it's dark. It's a dark movie. But I think that one was a huge step forward for the Asian community in terms of representation because it pushes back against the model minority myth, which is 100% one of the themes of American-born Chinese. But I think Better Luck Tomorrow is like really important in the conversation about, showing different parts of the diaspora. I think American-born Chinese, what I think it brings differently to this conversation is that it really brings it to the current generation, right? Because Better Luck Tomorrow was in like early 2000s. The original American-born Chinese comic came out in the early 2000s. Warrior is on Cinemax, so not everybody's going to watch it. And it's also like a crime drama about intense racism, and it's extremely violent. Fresh Off the Boat is, I would say, only the first season is particularly real. And then it just becomes another sitcom. And I think, but that's also why I think Fresh Off the Boat's important, because it was just a normal show with an Asian family. So it didn't, to Kat's question, it didn't sort of advance the narrative in a sense, apart from just general representation. I think that American Born Chinese, I don't think it necessarily brings anything that new, stuff that like hasn't already been done, obviously since the book has been out for a really long time. But I think that it is the perfect and safest way for people to understand Chinese culture, understand what it's like for kids of the diaspora, particularly when they're so marginalized in their like communities, but also kind of understand the, in a more realistic sense, family dynamics. Because I can think of the only other really real, like hard hitting example of that sort of parent child relationship from the diaspora is Turning Red. And I guess you could say Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Yeah.
But Turning Red made me cry. American Born Chinese hasn't made me cry yet, but it has made me feel more seen consistently than Turning Red.
Yeah, I would agree. Having not seen much else, that it does bring something else to the table. I think I agree with you in that it is kind of talking about these themes, about identity, about reconciling with your cultural roots, just growing up in general, into like the current generation and like current understandings of diversity and things like that within that context. So I think it does bring something new.
Yeah, certainly. I think it's that self-hating sort of, that theme of self-hate.
Yeah,
I think is the new thing it brings.
I mean, that was in the original American Born Chinese, like the.
I guess to a new audience, then you would say.
Yeah, and I also think that in general, like stories, like media, especially media that is produced, so like movies and or shows that are about like race and identity, it's hard to have like a saturation of it because
Absolutely.
These things all have like, they had to pull investments from somewhere, right? Like there's money that goes into this more than just like small, and even indie productions need money. And so like it's kind of different, I think, from like writing, where there can be a lot more because just like in terms of the cost overhead, it's a lot lower. But I think in our current point, in our, like in the West, like there's no way for you to actually tell like stories that are the same, because like I don't think you can keep pulling investors for the same thing that is about
not
like,
for stories about about minorities like
exactly
us.
Yeah. So I think right now within these media specifically, I don't think that's possible to tell nothing new about the diaspora experience.
100% agree. I think that we as creators, and I say this for like TTRPGs, right? And same thing goes for film. These creators don't get like second chances. We often don't get second chances. And like the sequel or season 2 is never guaranteed. And you've seen shows that shouldn't be canceled get canceled. And I think when it comes to stories about the diaspora, I think it is well known that if you get a chance to tell a story, you do everything you can to tell as much as you possibly can within the confines of the system you're operating in.
Yeah. And that being said, I also like to answer the other part of that question, which I feel like Kat asked like already. It's a little bit like a rhetorical question about like do these stories always need to tell something new about this topic? And I think the answer is no, because they will generally always be different. And it's also okay to like say the same thing, but there will be aspects that are different because it's from different perspectives. So
yeah, and I just think there's not enough stories yet, so you're always going to see something new regardless of your intent. I think we just need more stuff like American Born Chinese. I don't think there should. I mean, we haven't finished the series, but it's one book. Like it's just one book. It's not like a series or anything. So I don't think we're gonna get.
There are a lot of books that exist already that talk about like.
Yeah, and I think we should have more stories like that. Like I would love to. You know what I think does a really good job of it, like Spider-Verse, like the Spider-Verse movies. I can't wait to see the sequel, but I think they do a really good job of introducing audiences to new characters and new perspectives.
Yeah, I think then to add on to what you said, it would be great if there are a lot more of like, how do I like media with like mass appeal that are talking about this topic, because
100%.
I think that's a part of what you were saying as well, like the Spider-Verse, and then like this show that is on Disney Plus.
Everything Everywhere All at Once, winning all those Oscars. 100%. I want to see more stories about the diaspora, but I also just want to see like more. They don't even have to be set in our time, because imagine if you had a story about the diaspora, but set in like a science fiction universe. You could still do that, and it would still be an interesting story, and you could still cast an Asian actor, but it doesn't have to be like the Chinese diaspora, right? I think I want to see this in like. I think my dream would be for somebody to be able to turn on their TV or their computer and go to their favorite streaming platform and be able to, across multiple forms or multiple sort of like programs, see a full picture of the diaspora. Like I want people to see the really intense racism that people face, right? Whether it be historic or present, right? There is obviously I recommend Warrior, but there is also an independent film that I would also recommend by Justin Chon. He is most famous for being the token Asian Eric Yorkie in the Twilight franchise. But yeah, Justin Chon wrote a movie called Gook about two Korean Americans who run a shoe store during the LA riots. And I want to see more stories like that. I want to see stories like Everything Everywhere All at Once, because that was novel and very different, right? Because it was sci-fi, but also like you don't see stories about, the mom, like Michelle Yeoh's character. You don't see that. You don't see characters that are like suave and desirable in a lot of movies. Like for many people, I think until Everything Everywhere All at Once, Ke Huy Quan was basically just the goofy token Asian in Indiana Jones and the Goonies, even though his characters were awesome. Like Short Round and Data were awesome characters.
Oh, you're talking about like male presenting characters that are Asian as being attractive.
Yeah, 100%. And like, I want to see more of that. Like, I think that's why Simu Liu in the Barbie movie, I think, is important too. Because I remember my cousins when they were like really young, for Christmas wanting like a doll, but they not being able to find like an Asian one. Right, and I think that's why like Simu Liu in the Barbie movie is like Asian Ken is like really cool. I don't know if they're going to be Asian Barbies, but I want to see Asian stories or Asian characters across all forms of media. Like I want to see horror movies. I want to see like these romantic comedies, like Crazy Rich Asians. Like I want to see these dramas. I want to see action movies. I want to see TV shows. I want to see sitcoms. I just want to see more. And it can't be that we just get one a year.
You want to see more produced in the West.
Yes, because of course we can go and watch like mainstream sort of like productions from China and Hong Kong and all that. But in the context of this episode, when we're talking about the diaspora, that's simply not going to be the case.
Yeah.
If we're gonna go there,
like,
we're gonna get one of the Sprouse brothers playing in a Chinese movie.
Yeah, diaspora made media for diaspora.
Exactly,
Everyone else as well.
and everyone else, and I think it's gotta be palatable to it's got to have that mass appeal, not only because it needs to be financially successful, but also because I think it is a lesson in empathy. It can't just be like, oh, we watch only Asians watch American Born Chinese and just feel like, oh, that's me, but then nobody else understands it. Like, I think it's important for other people to understand it. And I think Disney and like the production team behind the show made the right moves. Fruit fly. Made the right moves in making it appealing to like a wider audience. And I think there's something to be said for like approaching a hard topic. But I think you have to find a balance of like finding the right hard topic to touch on, making it accessible. And I say this within the context of TTRPGs too, considering this is my grievance about the thing that we did. Remember that thing? Is like, I think it's important to have conversations about hard topics and have media examine hard topics. And I think when you shy away from them, I just say it's fantasy. I think you're taking the easy way out. And so with American-born Chinese, I think it is not the case of Disney taking the easy way out, but I think it is a case of Disney making a hard conversation more accessible to people. That's my take on it. And I think I really commend them for that. And that is a feat in terms of how it is written. But yeah, do you have any other thoughts about American Born Chinese before we wrap up?
Nah, I think it's pretty fun. It's a fun series to watch. It's not.
And it's like the special effects are good too.
Yeah.
Well, I guess you haven't gotten to some of the other stuff yet. I think the initial CGI, that chase scene in the beginning of the first episode, CGI not so good. But as the series progresses, it's really good. It gets really good. And
that's good.
The practical effects are really well done. And you could tell they're trying to make it look like an old Chinese movie.
Yeah, I did feel that. And
you're going to get it later on. It's so good.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
it's fun. It's not too heavy. So I would recommend it for general consumption.
Certainly not. I actually am guilty of being like, there is this one episode where they go to like a party in the present. They go to a party and I'm full on expecting the worst of it. I'm like, are they going to ambush him? Are they going to like beat him up? Or is he going to get like assaulted? Are they going to racially attack him the entire time? And that doesn't happen. But like the entire time I'm expecting the worst. And I don't know if that's what they intended. If they did, kudos. But if they didn't, it's just me being like, oh my God, when is it going to happen?
Yeah.
And I think that's how you know they've made it very relatable.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. Yes. But anyways, we have some folks to thank for this episode, and it's our amazing patrons. Our patrons make this possible. Our patrons will actually have like a very extended version of this episode, because this episode is just going to be us talking about American Born Chinese, but our patrons are going to get like an extra 40 minutes of content on this episode. Our patrons get a lot of extra stuff. They get our show notes. They get behind the scenes stuff. They also get a whole other video podcast, the video for No Dice, No Problem, our new monthly show where Drew and I talk about nothing related to Asian representation. Like literally last month, Agatha, Drew and I talked about how we want to do a podcast in a bathroom and just sit in like adjacent stalls and just do a podcast like that. It's just Drew has been talking about doing this for like months.
I do not understand.
But that is No Dice, No Problem. That is a monthly show. Audio does go out, but patrons get exclusive video and an exclusive theme song performed by Drew. It is real good. But that's it. We have some folks to thank. All of our disciples or guardians. I'm going to actually rename some of these because I think our most honorable patrons, I want to call them our most honorable sponsors. Um, but Metal Weave Games, Valorous Games, Michelle, Stefan, most honorable times two. Got to say it every time. Epic Impulse and Bob C. You folks are amazing. I'm just so happy that we have a community behind us, and I want to make sure that we make you folks proud and keep putting out good content. But Asians Represent, we've only got a couple more episodes in this season, and we've got some good ones. We have Liana is leading her first episode, and it's going to be on like Final Fantasy. I know nothing about it. I'm just going to be there producing, but Liana is doing that. Super excited about that. We're doing one on, I believe, Agatha on Korea. We're pre-recording that one, right? And then we've got our finale episode where I think we're talking comics again, but I have to check. But yeah, we've got a couple episodes ahead of us this season, and then Liana and I were talking about doing a Dungeons and Asians one shot. But it would be a test of the new game we're designing called Wandering Blades. So we're probably going to do that after this season of Asians Represent ends. But I'm just excited that we're doing this. Agatha, I'm excited that you and I got to do this episode together because I really enjoy hearing your thoughts on American Born Chinese because I was really genuinely curious about what you would think of this. And I really want to know your thoughts on the flashback episode. Like, I think you're gonna really love it,
right,
but I want to hear I want to hear your thoughts on it because I laughed so fucking hard. I thought it was just so good because it like the way they did the sets, they made it just look so much like a Chinese TV show, like the shows that are always on repeat at your grandparents' house.
Yeah.
Like they made it, they did such a good job of making it look like that. I'm just super hyped, but I hope even if you're not Asian, even if you're not Chinese, you should watch American Born Chinese because it is an incredible show about the diaspora, about discovering oneself, but also is a really interesting gateway into Chinese mythology and classical Chinese literature like Journey to the West. And all of the media associated with Journey to the West.
It's really different, though. I would not take
very
it
different. Don't. It's not canon. It's not canon.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting look into the world of Journey to the West adaptations or things inspired by it. But yeah, so if you have access to Disney Plus, if you have access to a friend who has Disney Plus, try watching it. If not, you're perfectly fine reading American Born Chinese because it is an incredible graphic novel that is still in print. So I would definitely go check that out. But yeah, I just wanted to say, Agatha, I'm glad we did this episode together. And to those who are listening or watching, thank you for joining us for this episode of Asians Represent. And we'll see you next time.
Ooh,
bye, everyone.
Bye.